Afternoon, my beautiful people. I go by the name Sotadeology. In today's particular live session, which is Sotadeology Lecture 26, I title it The Anatomy of Sotadic Triangles as Reality of the Universe. So now this particular today's video is going to be quite insightful. It's going to be educative because we're going to learn, some deep, deep hidden reality of the universe. You understand? So it's going to be quite insightful. That being said, I want us to actually, dissect the title, which is Sotadic Triangle. Actually, when you look at, this summation pattern, let me put it like that. When you look at this summation pattern, by the time you look at the baseline where we have the stacking of 0 and 1, which is, the baseline where we have the baseline of the blue summation pattern, you can actually liken that to equilateral triangle. And so we have the inverse, we have the inverse of that, which is the, red summation pattern, which gives an inverted equilateral triangle. So now what we have right here, we're going to actually dissect it. I'm going to actually explain, the summation pattern formation as we have it, in order to explain the reality of the universe. And then we get to know how is, feasible for any object to be manifested, or rather to be instantiated in space. So we get to know the feasibility, the possibility of having any object to, emerge in the universe. So now, the title, I have it to be Sotadic, that Sotadic is more or less like the adjectival form of Sotade, which is my surname. And so I have the triangle right there. So before we can actually, the essence of having Sotadic triangles is for the fact that there is no way you can actually have a real object in the universe without having what I would call imaginary object. So the imaginary object that we have, which is related to the real object in our real world, is in another dimension. You understand? The object is as well in our real world, but in another dimension. And that is why I said before that intelligence is being constrained. Intelligence is constrained by dimensions. And so we need to understand the interconnectivity of dimensions for us to really understand that nothing can actually be instantiated in the real world without having its counterpart in the higher dimension. And that is why that is why we could see that by applying formula of everything, we have this transition from substrate dimension to higher dimension to really have the reality of the universe. So if I'm to explain that in a way that, in a better way, let me rather say in a better way, such that we'll be able to understand, it's more or less like having a point in the universe. We know that there is no way we can have a point in the universe if that point is not being inversely related to any other point, because there will be no way we can identify the point. There will be no way we can actually label the point. There is no way we can, you know, do anything with the point. So it is more or less like the point is non-existent. You understand? So before we could have any point in the universe at all, we must have another point that will be inversely related to it. And by having such system, then we could have what is known as relativity. The essence of relativity is basically for one to have, this either infinite trajectory from one point to another point, or have instant trajectory, which will be, in vertical orientation. You understand? So now it follows that we can only get, real instantiation of any object by having vertical trajectory, which is the instant trajectory of time, which happens to be the default trajectory or the default nature of time. You understand? So by the time we look at the whole thing, we'll get to know that, everything is everything about this diagram, which I'm going to, explain, is genuine. You understand? So now basically, when you look at this diagram as we have it, we have one equilateral triangle, and when you dissect the first blue equilateral triangle, you can see that we have constancy of 1 to the left, and then we have, variation of numbers 1 to 3 down to 0, which, stands for 1 to 3 to 10. You understand? But I have it to be 1 to 3, then back to 0. So we have the progression in 10 places, and as well we have the constancy of 1 to be in 10 places. Then when you go through the base, we're going to have it to be in 10 places, and that makes the triangle to be an equilateral triangle. Okay, so now the first thing I want you to understand about this summation is for the fact that we have constancy of 1 at left side, and then we have the variation of numbers from 1 down to 10 at the right side. So what this is telling us is very simple. It simply means that the equilateral triangle, the so-called equilateral triangle, has an inherent asymmetric nature. Now, equilateral triangle supposed to be symmetric by nature, having all sides to be equal, but then we have this inherent nature of asymmetric phenomenon. So what is that telling us? That is actually telling us that we have variation at one side, and then we have constancy at the other side, which means that the side where we have variation can actually be likened to the, how am I going to put it? I'm like trying to see how I can put it. Well, what we have right here, the shape that we have right up here is more or less like cone, you understand? So then, but if you look at it, right from where I have the Big Bang singularity, so if you look at, the diagonal trajectory where I have time trajectory expansion by constancy, don't forget that we have the inverse of that to be this diagonal trajectory where I have energy trajectory contraction by variation. So basically, definitely once we have constancy at one side, we're going to have, reaction of that to be another thing entirely. You understand? So now we have this equilateral triangle, and then by having this linear, or let me rather say linearly summed formation, by having this linearly formed, by having this linearly summed formation, then we could see beyond the symmetric nature of the equilateral triangle. So we can see that indeed we have this hidden asymmetric nature. And then what is the essence of having that asymmetric nature? The thing is this: whenever time is in relativistic scaling with energy, I've always been saying it that time has two identities, and also energy has two identities. Time is instant by default, and then the instant trajectory of time, we can only get that vertically, while the infinite default nature of energy, we can get that horizontally. So now when you look at the central vertical trajectory, there you could see that I have this dotted circle around the numbers. And so when you follow that down, you can see that at the extreme end we have 1, and then we have 1 here. So that is actually pointing to the fact that we can only get the instantiation of real object via that vertical trajectory, because let me quickly cite an example that will make you to understand what I'm driving at. The thing is this: the way relativity works is, when you have an object, so let's say we have, okay, rather let me put it this way, let's say we have Mr. A and Mr. B together on Earth. Or rather, let me say I have Mr. A on Earth, and then Mr. A now travels away from the Earth, and then it travels away from the Earth into space to a certain distance from where he could actually see the entirety of the Earth. And based on that, Mr. A could really say that Earth is spherical, not that Earth was flat, which was, his perception before. So now, for the fact that Mr. A traveled away from the Earth to that certain point where he could actually get the full picture of the Earth to know the reality of the Earth, that Earth as well was moving away from Mr. A. And if Mr. A should make any attempt to approach the Earth as well will approach it, because by the virtue of the distance, there is this central point between the Earth and Mr. A, and that is the virtue of relativity. Okay, so now, by that virtue of relativity, then it turns out that Mr. A cannot get the actual or the exact location of Earth at any point in time, because any attempt to move towards Earth as well will move towards Mr. A, and any attempt to move away from Earth as well will be moving away from Mr. A. So now, how can we then get to know the exact location of Earth, at any given point? The only solution is only if Mr. A could travel at instant speed. So if Mr. A could travel, if Mr. A could travel at instant speed from where he is, then he will be able to meet the earth at the exact location, at the exact place, because the movement will not allow for the earth to actually move because it is instant. So the only solution is for Mr. A to move instantly to where the earth is. So now let's say Mr. A now traveled further into space such that the earth is out of sight. Now we know that in that kind of situation, we have moved into what is known as complex system. Because now if Mr. A should try to approach Earth, Earth as well will be approaching Mr. A, and then it will get to a point where Mr. A will be able to see the Earth again. So now for the fact that Mr. A could not see the Earth doesn't mean that the Earth doesn't mean that the Earth has disappeared. You understand? So the Earth is somewhere in the space, but then for Mr. A to now get that Earth where it is, to get the Earth at its exact location, then Mr. A will have to travel instantly. And so that is why the instant momentum of time is highly essential. The instant momentum of time is highly essential. Then we will get to know why that is so. We'll get to know why that is so, because we have this phenomenon of quantum entanglement, which is which actually refers to this instant momentum. And so we know that based on relativity, which is based on relativity of Einstein, which is special relativity, nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. And if we now have a momentum that is instant, it means that indeed there is a momentum that is faster than the speed of light. So from the time energy wave model, you will see how it is not so feasible for us to have momentum that is faster than the speed of light. But then the only solution to that is only if we could have that instant momentum as a transition from substrate dimension to higher dimension. So now you understand that if we could have that instant momentum to be a transition from substrate dimension to higher dimension, then there is possibility to have that cohorting nature of instant momentum and the speed of light. You understand? So now we now know that it is very important for us to have instant momentum if we must have instantiation of real object, which will actually be made possible upon the emergence of the imaginary world in other higher dimension. Okay, so that being said, now when you look at it, we can get to see that constancy at one side is so essential to support the variation at the other side, and the essence of the variation as we have it is to facilitate mass convergence. The variation as we have it at other side is to facilitate mass convergence, and then at every edge of the shape we must have what is known as arbitrary mass convergence. So now it's going to be an arbitrary mass convergence for just one object, but the moment we have the inverse of that object in higher dimension, then it's going to become a real object. So what am I trying to say? When you look at the equilateral triangle of the blue linearly summed formation, you can see that we do not have zero at the point where we have the big bang singularity and then have zero at black hole singularity. So we only have zero at the black hole singularity, which is written in blue, zero. At the other side, we have one. So because we only have 1 0, then it means that the equilateral triangle is yet to be real. And so at the edges of the equilateral triangle, we're going to have what is known as arbitrary mass. Arbitrary mass. Because the mass must be instantiated for the object for the object to become a tangible object that one can actually relate with. Okay, so I will explain further with time energy wave model. So by using time energy wave model, you'll be able to understand that quite all right. But now I just want us to, dissect the, number summation, the linearly summed formation that we have. Okay, there are some deep secrets right in this equilateral triangle, these Sotadic triangles that I want to quickly explain right here. Now, when you look at the constancy of 1 at left side, we have it in 10 places. But then, if you follow that down diagonally as we have it, you can see that we continuously have reduction. So then the 2, we have that 2 diagonally to be in 9 places. And then we have the 3 diagonally to be in 8 places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, sorry. We have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have it in 10 places. Then the 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We have it in 9 places. The 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have it in 8 places. Yes, I got it right. Then we have the 4 in 7 places. We have the 5 in 6 places. We have the 6 in 5 places. We have the 7 in 4 places. We have the 8 in 3 places. So basically, we have the 9 in 2 places, and then we have the 0 ones. So when you look at that, you can see that we have this, when you look at the pattern, you can see that 2, which we have in 9 places, corresponds to 9. So definitely, if you understand numbers, you can get to know that 2 is a kind of number that allows for balance. You understand? So basically, the moment we have 2, 9, then we know that 9 is the king of all numbers, because when you try to get a digital root of number, you try to get digital root of number 3 and 6, you see that 3 and 6 will alternate, but the digital root of 9 will remain constant. And with that, we get to know that 9 is the king of all numbers. In fact, 9 is a special number of Almighty God. Yes. So it's a number that actually travels through that vertical trajectory. 9 is the number that could travel through the vertical trajectory. It could travel through the 0. So now the 0 is more or less like a placeholder. And so the number that can actually travel through 0 is 9. So now, when you look at that, by dissecting the diagonal reduction, we could see that indeed we have that contraction by variation towards the 0 number as we have it right there. And then we can get to say that the expansion is made possible by the constancy of 1. So with this, we can actually track which side is contracting. So basically what this is telling us is have a contraction at one side, you are going to have an expansion at the other side. The whole essence of the system is to allow for balance, But then the balance is done in such a way that the convergence of mass worth is being accounted for in that contraction of in that contraction that is made possible by variations. And so the kind of trajectory that we have where we have this variation is known as the trajectory is the trajectory of time. You will see that in time energy wave model. That is the trajectory of time, and the trajectory of time is where we have this gravitational potential. That is where we have the constancy of gravity. So now we can see that the constancy of gravity by value might be so, so small compared to the constancy of light speed. So the convergence of mass worth is being accounted for that reduction, or for that small value compared to the constancy of light. And then the other side of the vertical trajectory, we have the constancy of light. Okay, so now that being said, we can now then see that the moment this blue equilateral triangle is being flipped such that we have the inverse of it to be this red linearly summed formation. And so by having that, then the whole circle is complete, because we could have another 0 right here, and that stands for the Big Bang singularity, while the other blue 0 stands for black hole singularity. So now it's until when the circle is completed that we can actually have the real manifestation of the of that equilateral triangle of the blue linearly summed formation. So we're not going to actually get to see the other part, which is, don't forget I said imaginary worth. So the red linearly summed formation is the imaginary worth, which, if we're to use electron, I can call it positron, while the blue linearly summed formation is electron. Okay, so now the electron is made manifested upon the emergence of the positron. So now, if we have a positron in higher dimension, if we have a positron in higher dimension that would be integrated into the substrate dimension, what kind of activity are we going to have? We know that positron, when it comes in contact with electron, it will actually, it will radiate, it will turn to energy, you understand? But basically, we're not referring to the positron of the substrate dimension. We are referring to the positron of the higher dimension. So there could be this possibility of that positron coming into the substrate dimension, then get escaped again without touching the instantiated electron of the substrate dimension. So that would only energize momentum for us to have that energy energized as I have in my research publication to allow for momentum towards the singularity of the black hole. You understand? So basically, many things can happen, but then what I know is that we often have that integration of the positron into the substrate dimension so that energy can be energized. And that flipping mechanism is what I call the signature of Almighty God. You will get to know why it is the signature of Almighty God, because when you look at it, the whole reality is then transformed to information, because we know that the only way we can move from the substrate dimension to higher dimension is to have trajectory instant trajectory. And for us to have that instant trajectory, which can actually, get rid of the initial momentum such that we could, have a flipped momentum. Don't forget that the kind of momentum that we have from the Big Bang singularity is a kind of expanding momentum. Now, the moment we have that instant trajectory of time, it will get rid of that expanding momentum such that we could then have the contracting momentum as we have in the black hole. Okay, so now we now know that it is highly essential for us to have instant momentum, to have a kind of static and undulating field, because the reason I call it field is that we have the trajectory to be vertical, which means that it is static, but then it is being elongated. And when something is static, when something is said to be instant, we shouldn't have any form of elongation to it. But because of the relationship of time to energy, that elongation is being caused um, by that default nature of energy to be everywhere. Energy by default would want to be everywhere. That is why by default energy is infinite, and time by default is instant. And from that we could get to see why it is ideal for us to have this flexibility of the fabric of space. You understand, because of the contracting nature of time and then the expanding nature of energy. But then when time is in relativistic scaling with energy, it becomes smooth, which is continuous. And then when energy is in relationship with time as well, then it becomes discrete. Okay, so now once we understand that, then we can get to see that it is only via this vertical trajectory that we could have the instantiation of reality. And that simply means that the central point is the point of reality. Just the same way when you have two objects that are being inversely related to each other, the virtue of relativity will create a central point between them, which will then be the point of their reality. You understand? So, but then this central point is the point of reality. I call it the present phase of time peregrination. We can as well call it event horizon. Event horizon is that point where we have where the expanding nature, where the expanding nature of the cosmos, of the space will be, you know, will be totally quenched for us to have the inverse of that as the black hole. And once we get to understand that at event horizon we can really have detailed information of everything, even all things that are falling into the black hole, we still have the information. So event horizon is where we have detailed information, and as well we can say the present instance of every human. At every present instance of every human, we can get both the past and the future, because the present is the vertical orientation of the past and the future. And that is why we could have the elongation. We need to understand this fact about the anatomy of Sotadic triangles. And so basically, with this, we get to know that every real object has its inverse version at higher dimension. We need to know that. But then, let's look at another thing that we have. So basically, I want to prove entanglement with these Sotadic triangles. Now you can see that where we have Big Bang singularity, we have the stacking of 0 onto 1, and then the black hole singularity, we have the stacking of 1 onto 0. Now, the 0 cannot, that 0 cannot actually go through the 1 cannot go through the 0 because it is vertical. It can't go through the 0. So now, the 0, the energy of the 0 will displace the 1, and then it can do same thing with it. Don't forget that entanglement means that whatever it is done to one side will instantly be done to other side. So now, let's look at a situation where the 1 is being displaced inwardly. So if the 1 is displaced, if the 1 is displaced inwardly, then you are going to see that we have 1 right inside at the Big Bang singularity, then we have the other one inside as well at the black hole singularity. But if you look at it, you can get to see that the 10 that will be formed, the 10 which the 0 and 1 will form, will then be inverse of each other. So the 1 being inside of the whole system at Big Bang will be interpreted as 0, 1. But the 1 inside at the black hole will be interpreted as 10. So you can see that 10 is an inverse of 0, 1. Good. So that is entanglement for you. Then if it is displaced outwardly, then we're still going to have the same thing, because the 1 and 0 of the Big Bang singularity will be interpreted as 10, while the 0, 1 at the black hole singularity will be interpreted as 0, 1. Okay. So now when we look at this, when you sum every layer of this linearly summed formation, you're going to have the number that we have at the right side, the numbers that we have at the extreme right side. That's the number. Those are the numbers that you will get. But then if you give the number cursory look, you see that you have this alternating of odd numbers to even numbers. Now 1, 3, they are odd numbers. 6, 10, they are even numbers. 15, 21, odd numbers. 28, 36, even numbers. But then we now have 45. And then if you calculate the baseline, we as well have 45, but I made that to be negative 45 because it's going to be the inverse of both the 45 that we have up here and the 45 that we have right down here. So definitely we have 2 instances of odd numbers, 2 instances of even numbers. Why? we must have two instances of odd numbers and then have two instances of odd number. But by having odd to alternate with even number, it shows that we have momentum right inside the equilateral triangle. So we have this momentum from from substrate dimension, because by traveling through even number means that you travel through zero to higher dimension. So we have even dimensions right inside the equilateral triangle that is being formed. And so we have this momentum from substrate dimension to higher dimension through, the zero, because when you have even number, the entitle of the number will be exhausted, and then it's the same thing as traveling through zero. So now the odd numbers stand for, suspension, and when you have suspension, that is translated to infinity. So what do I mean by saying when you have suspension, it is translated to be infinity? What I'm trying to say is this: when you say you have the largest or the greatest natural number, if you are so convinced in your mind that, oh, let's say you reach about 1 billion, and then you have concluded that you have reached the largest natural number. But then, if you add one to that, you see that the number will still continue. So now, the kind of formula that you can have that will give you that notion of infinity will be odd generating formula. Odd generating formula. So we can just have the odd generating formula to be 2n plus 1. So now 2 times any natural number will continuously generate number as you add 1 to it. And then you can see that with that we have that infinite phenomenon. But then we have two singularities. If you look at the Schwarzschild solution to general relativity of Einstein, he actually discovered two singularities. So it is ideal for us to always have two singularities. There will be one singularity for Big Bang, and then there will be another singularity for black hole. So there must be a singularity at the beginning, and there must be a singularity at the end. So that is only if the trajectory is horizontal. Now, when we have vertical trajectory, of course, we can as well have suspension, but then by the virtue of the energy gap, we could have what is known as spontaneous symmetry breaking, which would allow for traveling through the suspension for us to go to higher dimension. And that is what we have right here. That's what we have right here. So now, with this, another thing I want us to now dissect is this. Is Big Bang singularity the same thing with black hole singularity? By the vertical trajectory, we know we could have a positron and have electron, which means that they are the same thing. You understand? So because the trajectory is instant, we can have that reality. But now, by the virtue of infinity, can the singularity of Big Bang be the same thing as the singularity of black hole? If we dissect that, we're going to say that it is not possible for us to have equal singularity. So now, when you look at the solution of time energy wave model, at the result level, the final result level, we have the wave pattern that is applied to that whole derivation, we have it being flipped. So the initial one, the later singularity is being inversely flipped to the initial singularity. And that simply means that The moment we have the introduction of relativistic mass work, then we can't have the singularity of the Big Bang to be equal with the singularity of the black hole. So the way I'm going to prove that is this. We know that all the generating formula will give us infinity phenomena. But then, how can we now say that we know that we have infinity? Is there any way we can get to have a finite phenomenon? We can only get to have a finite phenomenon if we could get a subset of that natural number. So if we could have the subset of that infinitely generated numbers, then we can have finite phenomenon. So how can we get to have that? The formula we can use, we have to be that the formula for these odd generating numbers is 2n plus 1. Then the formula for that subset of that will be 2n minus 1. But then 2n minus 1, by the time you implement that, you see that what you end up what you end up having is the same thing as odd numbers. But then the odd numbers of that 2n minus 1 is different from the odd numbers of 2n plus 1. How? 2n. If n is 1, 2 times 1 will give you 2. When you subtract 1 from it, you have it to be 1. When that n is 2, 2 times 2 is 4. When you subtract 1 from it, it will give you 3. Then you have odd number that is, you have, by the virtue of 2n minus 1, you have odd number that starts from 1. So if you now look at that 2n plus 1, when the n is 1, 2 times 1 will give you 2. Then plus 1 will give you 3. When that n is 2, 2 times 2 will give you 4. Then plus that 1 will give you 5. So you have odd number that starts from 3. By the virtue of starting from 3 and starting from 1, then you can see that even the finite phenomenon that you want to have, by definition, is infinite. And so the infinity of that one that starts with 1 is different from the infinity of the one that starts from 3. Okay. So, good. With that, we have gotten to know the difference. So with that, we have gotten to know that horizontally, the singularity of Big Bang is different from the singularity of black hole. So what kind of mass convergence can they have in such manner? So in the Big Bang singularity, we have what is known as energy density. In the black hole singularity, we have mass density. But the issue the issue now is that we often have this flipping mechanism almost like all the time. And so it might just be that you have mass convergence at black hole, and then instantly after a while you will have it being flipped such that you have energy density right there, and then you then have mass density at Big Bang singularity. But basically, when you look at the structure of time energy relationship at the Big Bang, we have the kind of phenomenon where energy is like trying to be everywhere, but then the contracting power of time was able to eventually catch up with energy such that it then constrained energy for us to have a kind of controlled momentum. And that is why we could have what is known as inflationary suspension right at Big Bang singularity. But then, when you look at that, you can see that the virtue of energy to actually be everywhere is what is actually expanding the cosmological space. because even though it is being constrained by that contracting virtue of time, it seems as if the energy has more power in that regard to expand the cosmological space. Then, when you look at what we have in the black hole, we have this neutron star suspension. The neutron star suspension, we have it because we have this contraction towards the singularity, but then around the singularity, we have this mass convergence situation that serves as resistance to that contraction. And so we have a kind of controlled contraction. You understand? But then the power of time is more pronounced. And so we could eventually have, the contraction to that singularity point. So now you can see that what we have at the Big Bang singularity is an inverse of what we have at black hole singularity. So it is always inverse it's always having inverse situation to make things to be instantiated. So we must always have that kind of balance. But then, from what I've just explained, you can see that even with the balance that we have this tiny introduction of variation that would later, result to probably the total collapse of the system. You understand? But the constancy, the virtue of constancy is to sustain the existence for a long period. You can see where the asymmetric nature of the universe comes in. So now, the whole reality of the universe is encoded right inside these Sotadic triangles. And by the time we'll explore time energy wave model, you get to see more about the reality of the universe. So now, with formula of everything, with the application of formula of everything is dt dm equal to capital Um plus 4m. With the application of formula of everything, we now know the entire reality of the universe. Now, the thing is this: by having the arbitrary mass convergence, which I call classical arbitrary suspension, we can actually liken that to black matter, to dark matter, to dark energy. You understand? But then we then see that okay, another thing I want us to see, okay, with this we can see, the kind of momentum from suspension to, through even number. So definitely, if we have singularity of Big Bang to be infinite, and then have singularity of black hole to be infinite, so the only point where we can have transition would be at the center, and that is why we often have this central emergence point or central emergent point. You understand? Because that is what will ensure stability, and that is why at the central point, this the central trajectory, which I call static and undulating field, is the field of reality. That is where object can actually be instantiated. You understand? But then I will have to explain why it is that the instant transmission of information, as we have in the quantum entanglement, is the solution that can actually give us global now. Albert Einstein said that there is no way we could have a global now. He called it relativity of simultaneity. So, of course, there is no way we could have that based on the relativity by the time we look at it. I said it that when you are moving away from the object as well is moving away from you. And based on that, you can't get to pin down the exact location of the object relative to you, or the exact location of yourself relative to the object. So it is only if you can travel instantly that you can get that reality, and that is why the instant transmission of information is so essential. So now let's look at what we have right here. So right here, I just try I'm trying to model that transition. So if I thought we call this entire two equilateral triangles to be the reality of the substrate dimension, then the entire reality of the substrate dimension, which we're going to call 2D, must actually be dependent on the higher dimension, which will be 3D, because just like I said that the dot in space in the universe, any point in space must be inversely related to another point before such point could be identified, before such point could be labeled. Same thing is applicable to this 2D substrate dimension. The 2D substrate dimension must be connected to a higher dimension, which is 3D, for its reality to be emergent. What do I mean by that? What I'm trying to say is this. Let's say I have a plain sheet of paper. I normally use this analogy a lot. If I have a plain 2D sheet of paper, it's a 2D object. If I place it on the ground, if I put an ant on it, the ant will not be able to explore the other side. And by considering the fact that the ant is unable to explore the other side, it means that the 2D object is not fully fulfilled, because the essence of having two sides is for anything to be able to explore both sides. So now, if the ant should try to cross the boundary, the border, which is the edge of the 2D paper, the ant will fall on the floor, and then the ant will not be able to explore the other side. But the moment you lift up the 2D sheet of paper up to a certain height, then you can see that the ant will be able to cross the border or the boundary and then explore the other side. So now what you have done is that you have made that 2D object to become a 3D object, though you might not physically see the transformation, you understand, but 2D object can only move forward, move back, move sideways. They can't actually jump up or go deeper on the ground. So by lifting up the paper, you have made that 2D object to actually explore the height, to explore height axis. Let me say height axis. Yes, you understand what I mean, like the vertical axis. You understand? So basically, you have made that 2D object to become a 3D object. You understand? So the full potentiality, or for 2D object to actually harness its full potential, it must be transformed into 3D object. So that is the whole explanation about it. That is the whole explanation about it. So even though the object is being so transformed by lifting it up, you still have it to be 2D. You can still explore the 2D, but the reality of the 3D is right there that you can't see with your eyes. Just the same way I can as well give you another analogy, that even though the 2D is on the ground, the 2D has, fulfilled its full potential. So what do I mean by that? The only way I can say the 2D is being able to fulfill its full potential by being on the ground is by saying that there is this continuous momentum. Now, by putting the paper on the ground, I can actually perceive the paper to be static. But if I now consider the earth in its entirety and consider that it actually orbits around sun, then I know that the paper itself is not the paper is not static on the ground. So by the virtue of the momentum, I can now say that the paper is being transformed into the 3D, but then the 3D will only be translated to having that ant to, it will be translated to having the ant to be exploring the other side in the higher dimension that I cannot see in my this that I cannot see in my own dimension. So the object is, the ant and the paper, I have the replicate of them in another dimension where the ant is able to explore the other side. And then anytime the ant has come to explore the side where I can see, I will see that physically, but the other side I will not be able to see that because it is in another dimension. So that is how I can explain it. I know this whole thing is sounding metaphysical, you understand, but that is just the reality of it. When you have a non-stop momentum, the interpretation of it is another thing entirely. And that is why, if I'm to use another analogy, which is the analogy of an observer observing an object at event horizon, the object will actually be static to that observer, but then the object itself is not experiencing any stoppage, neither is it experiencing any delay. The object will just glide into the black hole, but the external observer will not be able to see the object entering into the black hole. It will just appear to the external observer as though the object is static forever at event horizon. So that is it. We are limited per dimension. We are limited per dimensions, and that is why intelligence is limited per dimension. Wisdom is limited per dimension. So we are limited to what we can see. You understand? So we know our eyes. Our eyes, they have, the visible range. You understand? So as human, there is this envelope of infrared light to every human, but yet our eyes cannot see that. So the moment we have a device that can actually decode that for us, then we'll be able to see it. So even though we are unable to see some things, doesn't mean that those things are not happening. They are happening. You understand? But we're just being limited by the dimension in which we domicile. If we can travel beyond the dimension, then we'll be able to see things more than the way we currently have it. So it is similar to being on earth. Being on earth, you will conclude that the earth is flat, but if you travel into space to a certain distance, then you see the entirety of earth in another form, and then with that you can get to say that earth is spherical. You understand? Just the same way in the Euclidean geometry, you will say two parallel lines can never meet. But in Riemannian geometry, what do you have? You have a curvature where you have this kind of curvature that can actually facilitate the converging of two parallel lines. So we can never say, because we are being limited by dimensions, so we have to, if we go beyond the restriction of our dimension, we can get to see more things that will actually surprise us. So that is what that's all about. So that being said, I just want to try and get one. Okay, just let me quickly use this to, to give you, a typical example of what dimension formation is all about before I go to time energy wave model. When you have initial point, which is being inversely related to a later point. So let's say the initial point is red, big convergence as we have it right here. And then the later point is the blue convergence that we have to the right. Then central point will be generated. You can see where we have the dashed vertical line. That is the central point to the 2 points. And that is what I call relativity. So if any of the 2 points should try to approach the other, they will both do so. Don't forget that is the entanglement phenomenon for you. That is the entanglement phenomenon for you. So if the one is to be displayed, the one, what I'm trying to say is that if the one which is being stacked on that zero is to be displaced around the zero, if that is being displaced inwardly at one side, it will also be displayed. It will also be displaced inwardly at the other point, or at the other side, rather. Okay, so that's what we have here. So you can see that, and what we have right there is one dimension. So now if we go to two dimension, what do we have? Two dimension is nothing but having the initial one dimension and then have the inverse of that initial one dimension, which is what we have down here. When you look at where we have the blue line, we have red line at left side, here at the top, and then we have the blue trajectory at the right side. Consider that one dimensional line. Now let me move to the other one dimensional line. What do we have? We have the we have the blue trajectory to be at the left side, which is the, you can see that, which is the inverse of the red that we have here, and then we have the red right here. So the moment you have it like that, then we can have this vertical connection to it. The vertical connection is just, the instant trajectory of time, the default instant trajectory of time that I talked about the other time. So the moment you have the vertical connection to it, then you have 2D. Can you see that? So for 3D, look at it. For 3D is just to have the 2D. Now, this 2D is the same thing as the 2D that we have up right here, you can see. But then look at the one that we have underneath it. You can see that is the inverse of this one. If you use that relativity to judge it, you can see that. Now, look at this edge. What do we have? We have blue at the left. Here, what do we have? We have red. Here we have red. Here, what do we have? We have blue. So the 2D is being inversely related to the initial one, and so with that we could have vertical connections to it. And moment we have that, then we have 3D. Same thing we go for 4D. 4D is just to have this 3D as we have it, then have another inverse of 3D, which can then be connected via vertical connections, and then we have 4D. Then 5D will be to have the 4D, the entirety of the 4D, and then have inverse of that. And when that is being, when they are being connected via vertical connections, then we can say we have 5D. That is how it will go. Unlike the Euclidean geometry, Euclidean geometry, you have lines being orthogonal to one another in three formation, and that is the limit of it. You can't have 4D in the Euclidean geometry. Now, Einstein, you know what Einstein did to merge time to space? He actually, contracted the whole 3D of space to be the x-axis, while the trajectory of time will just be the vertical trajectory. So in the, that is being reduced back to 2D model. The entire thing is being reduced back to 2D. That is not how it should be, because we're talking about progression. We're talking about higher dimensions. So we should have that kind of hierarchical formations. And so with this, you can see that it is ideal to have our dimensions the way I have used this to explain it. So now let's go further. I'm just looking for time energy wave. These are my images. If I've been using, now you can see, let me briefly show you this. Well, this is one of my research publications. You can see, seeing the anatomy of quantum gravity through formula of everything. You can see there, you can see my name right there, author. Then you can see it's a research. You see that's being highlighted. Then significance of contribution. It was a novel, as at when I published it, it was a novel research, publication. So the significance of contribution, I have it to be 3: originality of content 4, technical quality 4, clarity of presentation 4. So you can see that is for the second research publication, and it was published it was published 2021. You can see that right there. It was published 2021. Let me see if I can see the second one. Okay. The second publication. The second publication is this. You can see the time theory of the universe. The time theory of the universe. You can see that. You can see my name right there. So you can see International Journal of Scientific and Engineering Research. So you can see it was published, I think, 2021 as well. I think one was published October, this one was published June or July, around that time. But then you can see that in the okay, so yes, I got it right. This particular one was actually published. Look at where I have issue 10, volume 12, issue 10, October 2021 edition. So now let me go back to that other one. Okay, now you can see this one, issue 6, June. Oh, this was published 2022, rather 2022. Yes, so you can see it right there. Okay, let me quickly show you this. You can see certificate of publication. This acknowledges that Olusegun Sotadic has successfully published a research paper seeing the anatomy of quantum. So you can see that. Okay, good. So now okay, let me quickly use this to explain. So now in time energy wave model, you can see this is just the functional information system of time energy wave model. Okay, now when you look at this, The formula of everything, like I said the other time, is dt dm equal to capital Um plus 4m. Now, from that, you can see that dt dm represents the curvature of time trajectory, which is the blue time wave, to curvature of energy trajectory. Don't forget that you can only have curvature by mass convergence, and that is why I derive the formula to be dt dm, not dt de. So by mass convergence, you must have that variation to cause curvature. So now, then you have equal to capital Um plus 4m. That is a linear solution which is nested right inside the curvature, and that is why we could have this diagonal trajectory. So we have the diagonal trajectory in time, which must give us the reaction of that in energy. So, and then you see by the time we have the vertical trajectory, the baseline will be closed and we have equilateral triangle. But then the vertical trajectory is actually longer than the limit of equilateral triangle. And the reason we have it to be so is because it transcends beyond the limit of the curvature of that substrate dimension to connect to higher dimension, as you can see in this image. But then with this, you can then get to see that indeed we can have instant transmission of information as we have in quantum entanglement, and as well have the speed of light to be the speed limit of the universe. But you can only get that fact by using dimensions. Now let's look at what I'm trying to say. Now we have this diagonal. Look at this diagonal trajectory as we have it at the left side. That is the constant. It represents the constancy of light speed. Why this particular diagonal to the left represents the constancy of gravity. So because the mass convergence is being accounted for, so we could have the balance of constancy of gravity to constancy of light. And so now the thing is, you now see that after the big equilateral triangle, we have a compacted equilateral triangle, which I call, at times I call it quantum nucleus, or you can call it vacuum space. So now it is being contracted, but yet we still have it as equilateral triangle, which means that the constancy of light is still being maintained. So now the kind of mass convergence that we have is said to be right inside the compacted equilateral triangle. The mass convergence is said to be arbitrary convergence because electron is not being defined. You understand? So electron is not being defined. So electron is defined upon connection to the positron, to the electron of the higher dimension, which will be instantly converted to positron. Okay, so now I want to briefly explain why instant transmission of information is the only solution to have or to having global now. Now, when you look at this classical mass, the real classical mass, where we have the small blue convergence, you can see that at that point where we have genuine connection to this real quantum mass at higher dimension, the classical mass what is being suspended around the central point where we have the intersection of vertical trajectory to horizontal trajectory, which is the intersection of time trajectory to energy trajectory. But the ideal place where this classical mass supposed to be has to be that point of intersection. So now, because we couldn't have that mass convergence to be at the point of intersection, then it means that there is no genuine contact at both sides. And that is why Einstein said that there is no way there is no way we can have a global now. Don't forget that the genuine contact is made possible at higher dimension. There is no way we can even have genuine contact right at quantum level, even inside the substrate dimension. And that is why the electron is undefined right inside the substrate dimension until it is connected to the electron of higher dimension, which is instantly converted to positron to allow for the emergence of electron. So now we have genuine contact at complex level. Don't forget, at higher dimension is where we have genuine contact to allow for the creation of the electron of the substrate dimension. So where we have reality is this substrate dimension. But then you can now see that the instant transmission of information will allow us to have genuine contact at both sides, even though the classical mass world is being suspended around the intersection of time trajectory to energy trajectory. The feedback of that instant transmission of information will reach the classical mass instantly as it is instantly as it is connected to this positron of higher dimension. And that is why we could have global now. So now information is the solution. Instant transmission of information is the solution. So that is that. I believe this particular video is quite informative and educative. Please, if you like it, subscribe to my channel so that you can get further updates on it. So now we can get to know the momentum and know the position at the same time with formula of everything. So thank you. I'll call it a day. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Thank you. Okay, so let me briefly, I just want to briefly shape in this. The vertical trajectory where we have the instant transmission of information is where we have objective conscious experience. And now the moment the positron is injected into the system, it will energize momentum at this low energy state. And so we can have momentum towards the singularity of the black hole. And by having that momentum, this classical mass world will be relocated from where it is suspended to that point of intersection, and that will be the subjective conscious experience. Subjective conscious experience. So if you want to know about consciousness, I have a video on that. You can just get that video for you to understand that. So I'll call it a day right here. Thank you for your time. God bless you.